Little is said about life inside North Korea, but what happens behind the scenes of this regime goes beyond imagination. Among the most shocking secrets is the creation of the Pleasure Battalion, a practice so surreal it seems straight out of a dystopian fiction book. But here's the truth: it's not fiction. While the world debates freedom and equality, young women were turned into pieces of a system combining power, control, and a cruel spectacle. What if I told you that these women, chosen in their teenage years, underwent rigorous training solely to entertain and serve the ruling elite? No, this isn't an exaggeration. It's the reality of a regime where even clothing color is regulated, and living conditions are dictated by a system that prioritizes the leader's luxury over human dignity. It's impossible to ignore the stark contrast between the glamour displayed and the hidden suffering of these young women. Let's dive into this story that shocks and intrigues, revealing the secrets of a society as closed as it is mysterious. In the 1970s, behind the scenes of power in North Korea, a curious and disturbing story took shape: the emergence of the Pleasure Battalion. Imagine a selection process resembling a beauty pageant screening, but with much darker purposes. Young women were hand-picked like rare items on display to serve a ruling elite hungry for entertainment and control. The criteria were so strict that it felt like they were assembling a Hollywood-worthy spectacle, though the storyline was far darker. The Kipum-jo, as it was called, involved around 2,000 women, all under 20 years old. And before you think they were chosen for their experience or natural talent, it was the exact opposite. Youth and innocence were their ticket into this world. Singers, dancers, and of course roles of a more intimate nature were part of this peculiar army. This was more than entertainment. It was a carefully crafted strategy to reinforce power and feed the vanity of an isolated leadership. What is striking, and perhaps even more shocking, is the level of sophistication behind this operation. It wasn't improvised or disorganized. The Pleasure Battalion was a well-structured mechanism, reflecting a society where every detail of life, even the most intimate ones, was controlled. Imagine this: women trained to serve leaders who justified such practices with their authority. This narrative, however, is just the gateway to understanding the inner workings of this system. Within the Pleasure Battalion, the organization was almost as strict as in a traditional military, only with vastly different goals. Women were divided into subgroups, each with specific functions, reflecting the strategic vision of the North Korean elite. Some were trained to master the art of massage, turning their hands into almost therapeutic tools. Others were prepared for elaborate performances involving music and dance, which looked like luxury spectacles but concealed a sinister purpose. The most attractive members, according to established standards, had even more intimate roles. This wasn't voluntary, of course. It was an imposition disguised as a privilege, where consent became nothing more than a meaningless word. The internal hierarchy also revealed an obsession with control. Every subgroup was closely supervised, ensuring that everyone fulfilled their roles flawlessly. It was like a cold machine, leaving no room for individuality or emotion. Now imagine the contrast: women rehearsing traditional dances or songs during the day, while others prepared for far more delicate situations at night. This multifaceted scheme left no room for improvisation. Everything was orchestrated with precision, reflecting not only political control, but also psychological manipulation. This system, despite its inherently cruel nature, reveals just how far power can go when paired with total control. And if you think this is extreme, the selection process behind it takes the discussion to an even deeper level. The selection of women for the Pleasure Battalion was no simple task. It was an almost scientific process marked by chilling rigor. Candidates underwent detailed physical inspections, where even a scar could mean immediate exclusion. Imagine the degree of perfection required: soft voice, flawless skin, and a height under 5'4". It was as if the government aimed to create a kind of manipulable perfection. Medical exams were even conducted to ensure that those chosen met all the criteria. This level of scrutiny shows how control extended to even the most intimate aspects of life. But the process didn't stop there. Reports indicate that the women were selected at very young ages, almost as if the government sought to mold entire personalities to serve a greater purpose. Think about it. Instead of offering opportunities for growth, North Korean society used these criteria to limit these young women's life possibilities. This alone reveals the dark side of state manipulation. While these women were subjected to this relentless screening, the glaring contrast lay in the exorbitant spending on the elite. Around $3 million annually was allocated just for the leaders' guards' clothing. This figure symbolizes not only the disregard for the population's needs, but also how luxury was prioritized at the expense of human dignity. This context sets the stage for understanding the training that followed, which further amplified the scope of this strategy. Once selected, the women of the Pleasure Battalion underwent training that blended artistic, physical, and psychological disciplines. They were prepared to perform multiple roles, ranging from sophisticated entertainment to techniques for protecting the leader in risky situations. This training left no gaps. The young women were instructed in everything from flawless choreography to defensive maneuvers, creating an intriguing balance between delicacy and resilience. But make no mistake, the training wasn't just about practical skills, but also about submission. Members were molded to meet specific expectations, with no room for questioning. Imagine the pressure of being both a star on stage and a guardian in the shadows. It was a silent burden, but one that was constantly present. This was part of a larger strategy, where even the smallest movements of these women were controlled. Behind this rigor lay a clear intention to turn these young women into useful, versatile tools. They weren't just companions. They were pieces in a political game demanding versatility and absolute loyalty. This leads us to reflect on the conditions these women were subjected to, opening a window to understand the cruelest side of this reality. What happened to them off stage and away from the public eye? Although the facade of the Pleasure Battalion might have seemed organized, the reality for these women was entirely different. They faced constant humiliation, including invasive inspections that violated every boundary of privacy. Accounts from defectors reveal stories of young women who, despite their flawless appearance, carried invisible scars from a system that saw them as disposable. Imagine living under extreme pressure, knowing that any mistake could lead to severe punishment or worse, disappearance. These women had no choice. The environment of control was suffocating, leaving scars that went beyond the physical. Some were forced to fulfill the desires of the ruling elite, while others were discarded as soon as they lost their usefulness to the regime. It's almost impossible not to compare this reality to that of prisoners who, although they don't wear visible chains, live confined by rules that disregard human dignity. This reinforces how power can be cruel and inhumane when combined with an authoritarian system. Even though these practices have remained in the shadows for decades, there are indications that some of these realities persist. This makes us reflect. How can something so inhumane be sustained for so long without greater consequences? And more importantly, what are the psychological and emotional repercussions for these women, whose stories have been almost completely silenced? To better understand, it's essential to look at how restrictions on women in North Korea continue to shape their lives. Women's lives in North Korea are marked by a level of control that goes beyond ordinary social norms. From dress codes to daily activities, everything is closely monitored. They are forbidden from wearing bright colors or pants, as well as accessories considered modern. Violating these rules results in severe punishment, reflecting a society where individuality is crushed under the weight of imposed traditions. Even something as simple as choosing an outfit becomes a challenge. Curiously, during special events like official celebrations, women are allowed to wear colorful traditional clothing. It seems paradoxical. What is normally forbidden becomes acceptable under specific conditions. This isn't just a cultural issue. It's a reminder of the government's absolute power over every aspect of people's lives. Imagine not being able to choose how to dress daily, yet being allowed to shine during an occasion you didn't choose. This duality speaks volumes about the psychological control imposed. The height limitation for the Pleasure Battalion, women taller than 5'4" weren't accepted, also reflects how even physical details were used to shape an idealized standard. This obsession with control goes beyond appearances, encroaching on basic human rights. And it doesn't stop there. The connection between these restrictions and the social roles of women becomes clearer when we observe how they face even more challenging working conditions. In North Korea, women carry a burden that far exceeds their traditional roles. Often, they are the primary breadwinners for their families, whether through small, informal businesses or in the military. Even in the military, where structure might be expected, the reality is marked by harsh conditions. Insufficient food, poor housing, and a system that undervalues their contributions make military service a survival challenge. Still, they persevere, showing remarkable resilience. It's as if, despite so many adversities, they find ways to support not only their families, but also their communities. An example of this is women leading small underground markets, defying the rules to provide the basics. This resilience, however, doesn't erase the limitations imposed on them. With little to no voice in society, women become pawns in a game controlled by the ruling elite. Yet even in this environment, their stories teach us about strength and adaptation. The connection between their hardships and the country's authoritarian structure opens a discussion about how social roles can be both armor and a prison. It makes us wonder, what would it be like if these women had the freedom to choose their own paths? As we explore the reality of the Pleasure Battalion and the lives of women in North Korea, it becomes clear that extreme control turns people into tools and dreams into nightmares. So if this content opened your mind, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep exploring stories that uncover hidden truths. After all, learning about the world is the first step toward changing your own. So now, what's stopping you from taking that step?